of November. How are you?
We are good, thanks, and good morning, viewers.
Fantastic being here with Sarah.
Yeah.
It's a great team. Sarah does a huge amount of work out there. And
Okay.
Chris, we are delighted always to be here with you.
We were having a conversation before we come on air about the work at the Center for Constitutional Governance and especially within the specific docket of the Civic Space TV, the ability to bring together youth to redirect the conversation away from the semantics to the real issues. And it is something that is deliberate. I do not know whether it's a collaboration with other people or it is something you're pushing solely.
We are working with the partners as Center for Constitutional Governance to try to amplify voices of different sections of people.
That's right.
And particular interest, of course, is the young people who are the majority in this country. In the last elections, there were about 80 million voters aged between 8 to 30, and they are 78% of our population. The young people alone are the only single group that can determine a president of this country if they wanted to.
If they wanted to.
Yes.
You're
or if they chose to.
You're suggesting the young people in the country are yet to want or have demonstrated
yes,
that
have
they
that
do.
determination.
Okay.
They can single-handedly determine a president.
You
in
agree?
Uganda.
No, yeah, indeed. I think what Sarah is saying that the critical number, many of them, including the ones you can't be giving credit to, are already very busy and very active. And I'm delighted that in the course of our work, from my own perspective, I had actually over the last 18 months thought that the young people were not particularly very interested. In fact, as a matter of interest, they're very, very much interested. They're very, very much motivated, but they need leadership and they need the spaces in which a civic space is actually given. I think what Sarah is saying that as a single group, if they resolved that this is the way we want to go as young people, they have the numbers to be able to do it democratically, openly, and decisively.
All right, that premise shall be forming the part of the discussion a little bit later when we look at how over-politicking is retarding Uganda's development. Most of the youth have been victims of that and, well, used. But let's first look at the tensions between the Democratic Republic of Congo and Uganda with regard to the latest resurgence of the M23 rebel group. I'll begin with you, Joseph Othieno, to give us an overview of the M23 rebel group and the insurgency in the east of the Democratic Republic of Congo. It seems to be one that is not going away, and the latest is more like a repeat of an episode that we've seen before.
You know, as recent as 5 days ago, I was rather optimistic that although the start was unfortunate, that there was a possibility that the East African community leaders might be able to work towards the resolution of these conflicts. Considering the information that we have from various sources, both here in Uganda and within the region, it is seemingly less and less. Because as of today, there's actually contradiction. Uganda as a nation state is directly involved in Congo, and I actually beg the authorities in this country to review the manner in which we relate with Congo as our neighbors, because Congo is a critical neighbor. Congo is not only a friend, but Congo is our relative, because we've got relatives in Congo.
That's right.
Just as we do in Rwanda, and so do the people in Rwanda. Rwanda, the same thing. I would actually just like to urge the Rwandan government to look at their own lived experiences the last 30 or 40 years to resolve that actually Congo relations and Uganda relations will have to be resolved diplomatically for the long term and not through military, and that we're not going to resolve whatever the issues are through armed conflicts, and that we're not going to blackmail neighbors, particularly if in this case that they're weak. Uganda has got an interest, Rwanda has got an interest. Now, when it comes to M23 in much more detail, it is surprising that as recent as a few days ago, we thought that the Ugandan authorities were quite resolved that M23 needs to be checked. It would appear that in the last several days, there are conflict information. Uganda has an interesting power center, which we last saw when the only militias in charge of Kampala, where perhaps you see one tweet suggesting one thing, and a security spokesperson is taking a particular position and so do the government. So which element are we believing? It's very clearly the case that there are suggestions, for instance, that forces came from Rwanda to back the M23, but they went via Uganda. It's unlikely that such a thing would happen, if true, without a clear information of the Ugandan security forces. So who is in charge even here in Uganda? So it makes it very complicated for a country like Congo, which has been a very, very weak state since the killing of Patrice Lumumba to date. I want to say very quickly that people have suggested that Uganda has always gone to Congo to loot, including taking us back to the 1960s. The 1960s involvement in Congo was very specific. The UPC government at the time sent a specific backup for the Lumumbist forces who were then, if it had been successful, would have been the first initial post-independence authorities to control and manage a free and democratic Republic of Congo, not to occupy Democratic Republic of Congo.
Okay, interesting there, but of course there are elements there who will be saying, well, that is Joseph Otieno, UPC.
But it's a fact. It's a fact. And
what do you make of the latest tensions between Kampala and Kinshasa?
Quickly, as part of overview, I think we need to look at the genesis of conflict in DRC.
Yeah.
From the times of King Leopold and the extraction of minerals that happened under that colonial era, nothing has ever changed.
extraordinary, yeah.
It's only the faces that are changing and the people in charge of proliferation of minerals and guns. So it's a movement, minerals out of DRC and guns inside DRC. Yeah. Just as a quick example, if you take a quick look at the richest, one of the richest businessmen in Israel, Dan Gitler. Dan Gitler flew to Kinshasa in 1997 when he was 23 years. He tried to get audience with the Kabila Senior, but he didn't get quick reception until when Kabila was threatened with a civil war in 2000, and he struck a deal with Dan Gitler in exchange of guns and dollars and military assistance, and he got a monopoly license for diamonds, gold and cobalt. A license that he still holds, and a license that he was sanctioned by the American by using the Magnitsky Act for corruption, trading in corruption at the expense of the Congolese people. So if you look at what has changed in the DRC between the war and the proliferation of minerals and guns, you need to look at a change from that King Leopold outfit to now shrewd businessmen flying in 2 suits, waving offers for guns. And that's partly why Congo has not been stable over time. So when you move away from these conflict entrepreneurs who are largely go between with the military industries, because Dan Hitler was backed by Israel in terms of guns, Israel government.
And he would.
So then when you move away from them, you have merchants in the middle. And unfortunately, the merchants in the middle are our leaders.
Yes.
So that's why the Eastern DRC, which has the vast minerals, is the one that can never be stable. So there are many forces who benefit from instability in DRC. Just the recent International Crisis Group report indicates that there are 133 militias in DRC. These militias, known.
Yeah.
Some of these militias are on the side of government. So that shows you that even the DRC government, which keeps monopoly licenses for the likes of Dan Gitler, might not be immediately interested in a stable DRC.
Stable DRC.
Joseph Kabila made a lot of money from such monopoly licenses that are exploited without benefiting the Congolese people. Yeah. So you cannot do that when DRC is properly governed. The third element that has perpetrated conflict in DRC is the weak presence of government. Government is thin on the ground, so you have militias controlling territories, trading in minerals, and are able to sustain their small militia governments. So unless we deal with these 3 issues. On the other political side is the politics of exclusion. If you want to look at Banyamulenge, the Tutsi minority groups, and the rest of the people, and this element was brought out in the inter-Congolese dialogue, the exclusion element to be addressed for Congo to be stable. So unless you address these 4 elements, then you will have ADF taking advantage of a thin government on the ground and a larger ungoverned territory. You will have the ex-FAI in Interahamwe taking advantage also to keep in this place, and then also when they wish and they're able to sustain their rebel activities because of the minerals. Yeah. ADF does not need any other funding so long as they are based in Eastern DRC. No, they can trade in minerals illegally and sustain their activities. So these are the issues that the region must address.
When it comes to, I'm afraid I'm gonna have to interject here. When it comes to the exclusion factor, the fact that Banyamulenge, the Tutsi minority, these are more like border contradictions that were created by the colonial system as we were being sliced into, you know, communities fall on one side and on the other, and then of course they have interests. You would expect, for example, Rwanda to be invested in what happens to Rwandese or people of Rwandese origin who are on the other side, and perhaps forms why Rwanda is accused of doing certain things. Uganda also could have the same interest, but of course ours have been completely overtaken, or rather overshadowed, by the fact that we have formal engagements with the government there. Does that even complicate what is already some sort of a quagmire?
I have suggested only to an extent, because what do we do? The reality is that it's not only Congo that was carved up between communities, and that's why I say we are relatives. Do I go and bomb Kenya? You know, do I? You know, I could walk into Kenya in one day from my home in Agongera. Do I walking down there when I'm not happy about the election outcome that took place in Kenya, or when I feel that my identity communities in Kenya are threatened? What about in Turkana zone? What about in South Sudan? No, that's not the way to do it. And I said, but in Rwanda, in Uganda, and we're also in Uganda, how do you resolve that through bombing? You know, it is the case that you know, there is a sense of entitlement about particular categories on this continent, and I think when we shout Pan-Africanism, we need to wake up and see that as an African, as an identity, we are one people. You know, some of these other identity questions are neither here nor there. Granted, you know, it is true that the particular communities in Congo who feel marginalized, but so are we here in Uganda? What do we do? No. Part of the Rwandese government's argument usually is about the Interahamwe, you know, and it would appear that that is more about the issue than even the marginalization, because the marginalization thing plays to a hype, including about the Tutsi element where we want to have a sympathy thing. I totally agree and I understand it. The point is this, that as Sarah says, the bigger issue in Congo is a strong central government, which needs to be able to be enabled. That's why I told you that for us, when we went there in the 60s, it was about supporting, you know, nationalist forces that, by and large, if they were to be successful, it would have been able to support one Congo, you know, rather than actually simply saying that you focus on particular communities. Obote didn't have specific close identity relatives in Congo, but we're concerned about the manner in which Lumumba had been treated, particularly following the exploitation of the Belgians, and the manner in which the CIA and others killed Patrice Lumumba, and actually the long-term look that unless we're able to resolve and create a Congo which was an African nation, you know, for all of us Africans in this state, some of this quagmire would appear 60 years later. So I think really at the end of the day, it's very much about talking. You know, it's very much about a situation in which if you have a free and a democratic Congo, you know, responsible leaders provide for the weakest, and the weakest, which is basically socialist values, you know, the most marginalized, the weakest, the most under threat communities are generally supported by governments, particularly progressive left-leaning governments like what a UPC government would do, but not through bombing.
Sarah, have you seen any effort that is deliberate from Kampala to be able to resolve this in the best possible way, or Kampala would love to play
the merchant in the middle?
The perfect merchant in the middle.
Interesting there. All right.
No, it's a tricky situation. First of all, I believe that the Kampala regime is genuinely interested in wiping out ADF. Okay. But our presence in Congo does not begin with ADF. We were there in 1998 for reasons best known.
Contributed to the current mess.
Yes, and the Tsangani clashes that followed. So you need to ask whether we still have the Chisangani hangover as the Kampala regime. The M23, for the record, was defeated 5 years ago by SADC forces led by Tanzania, South Africa, and Malawi. And they were almost captured. At the time when they were almost captured, then they crossed over to Kampala.
Yes.
And Kampala gave them shelter. They were hosted in Isinjiro, in a refugee camp in Isinjiro, for 5 years. The UN Security Council did debate the M23 conflict then, and reports were adduced, which are online on the UN website, with evidence as to who was supporting M23. By then it was both Rwanda and Uganda. How M23 now escaped from a refugee camp to go back to Eastern DRC is a question that people should interest themselves in.
So
and whether then the presence of UPDF, because I saw the protests of the Congolese people saying UPDF should be kicked out of DRC. So the question should be then, how did M23 escape from a refugee camp in Uganda? And what happened to the commitment that Uganda had given the UN that they will disarm and make sure these guys do not destabilize DRC again as a host nation? How do we explain that? Then how do we then distinguish the role of UPDF in DRC to be purely about flashing out ADF and has nothing to do with M23?
Listen to this.
And resources in Congo.
Yeah, listen to this. This is a report carried by the Daily Monitor and written by Andrew Bagala. I will just read an excerpt. This was General Muhoozi Kainerugaba on Twitter, by the way. As for M23, I think it's very, very dangerous for anybody to fight those brothers of ours. They are not terrorists. They are fighting for the rights of the Tutsi in the DRC. The analysis here is this: the father-son conundrum playing out on the microblogging site. One pro-Congo and another prompting anti-Kinshasa elements is, according to high-level security and diplomatic sources, confusing Uganda's stand to international military strategists and foreign partners at a time of ongoing negotiations to halt UPDF troops involved in Operation Shuja and the regional force. What do you make of that?
You know, I had diplomatically, I'm a diplomat, as you know, I had diplomatically hinted at that at the beginning, and I really didn't want to go beyond that. So you made it very clear. That is exactly the issue at play, and in fact, that's the most important issue at play. And you know, I think we need to say this very seriously. In Congo, there are women in millions who've already died and suffered. In Congo, there are children. And in that sub-region,
also the women who are being raped.
And the women who are being raped. And many of these have been attributed to us. And in the very same Congo, we've got billions, you know, if not trillions of Ugandan shillings in this case, to pay back for our roles down there. It is that very same Congo where I went in the 90s. You know, we deceived SADC leaders, and I met 1 or 2 SADC leaders and they were furious in the 90s. This is official. They're furious at the manner in which NRA and Museveni and Kagame persuaded them that they should go and attack Rwanda, only to return for some other things. Although some of them went ahead and started getting engaged in many of these things. Yes, many of them came back and started doing some of the little bit of the thing. But they were furious. Now, as I said, any African who claims to be a Pan-Africanist must be ashamed at looking the other way when millions of our people in Congo, who have been massively raped and exploited over the last generations, you know, continue to do so, and they suffer simply because of their resources. Congo is not a threat to Uganda, has never been. Congo is not a threat to Rwanda, has never been. Congo has never been a threat to any other major country. Granted, people have been in Congo who've been threats to the other side. I think we need to be able to look at that. So in this case, the point Sarah was making, I think it's actually Mr. Museveni's responsibility to respond, to explain the situation to the people of Uganda. You know, the first role and job of a government is to provide a security of the lives and property of the people. So if it is the case that we had Congolese or Rwandese refugees in Uganda, they must be protected, you know. So if they're protected refugee camps, is it the case that the Ugandan authorities failed to protect them? And if they managed to escape, allegedly, was it a genuine escape? I know people escaped from here in October 1990 to Rwanda, allegedly escaped. So this country that presents itself as the merchant overseer of militarism in the region, how is it the case that we can actually have armed people or former trained armed people escape from Waka territories? So the responsibility of the Ugandan authorities is to explain exactly that. And that's the job of Mr. Museveni, to explain to Ugandan citizens. And know there is impunity in this country where Museveni can say what he wants to say, you know, and people, you know, even go ahead and talk hospitals, I'm the one who did that contract, come beat me kind of stuff. But on this one, I think it's far too more serious than that. It's very clear Mr. Museveni has taken a position. It's very serious, clear that his son is taking a different position. But I think what's at play here is the livelihood and resources of the people of Congo, but it's also the livelihood and people of Uganda, including our own.
Lastly, on this issue, before we transition on how over-politicking is retarding our own development as a country, Sarah Birete, do you see a diplomatic escalation of these latest tensions? Or somebody out there is willing to call a summit between Mr. Tshisekedi and Museveni?
I know that the EAC, from the time President Kenyatta was the chair of EAC, tried to mediate in the DRC conflict and worked on a deployment of a peacekeeping force.
That's right.
There was controversy when Rwanda wanted to contribute forces. But I think the standards of peacekeeping under the UN Charter in Article 2 should be maintained in the EAC peacekeeping process. Neutrality and impartiality of member states contributing troops. So if you go into the background, I think even Uganda might fail to meet that test of neutrality and impartiality where M23 is concerned. And then do we contribute troops to the EAC peacekeeping force? And if we don't, with Rwanda, that almost leaves Kenya alone. Because even Burundi has a conflict over DRC. And Burundi cannot meet the impartiality test of contributing peacekeeping troops. So you have Kenya and South Sudan. South Sudan is almost a failed state. They cannot do much. So it's only Kenya.
And is it?
Tanzania is not interested so far in contributing troops to the EAC. They played a bigger role in fleshing out M23 under SADC. So if you look at the conflicted parties in EAC, I think the immediate peaceful solution for DRC lies with SADC and not EAC.
Okay. Interesting there. We shall leave the conversation on DRC and the tensions between Kinshasa and Kampala at that, because we do not have the capacity to exhaust it. Let's now return to close quarters, Uganda. There are claims that politicians, on both aisles, government, opposition, including other players outside of that framework, are happy to politic and basically do what they can do in order to survive. And that is affecting the quality of the politics in the country. And at the end of the day, we are on a very, very wrong trajectory when it comes to that. Just give me an idea of that. It's an accusation, and you find yourself in the line of fire as an opposition politician with the Uganda People's Congress. Your own president, or one of those that claims to be a leader of the party, has been involved in politicking, so to speak. What do you have to say about that?
Which president is that? But look, I think it's extremely misleading and it's very dangerous. There isn't over-politicking in this country. There's actually less politicking in this country.
Sure.
And Sarah and I were having a conversation before we came on air about which way do we go as a country. I think we need to be able to have slightly much more political conversations, not conversations using politics. I know in this country part of the problem is that we have people in politics rather than politicians. If you've got politicians, particularly those that are driven by values, you know, then you'll address every issue within those lenses. I think that part of the people who are pushing that narrative about over-politicking are people who are saying that, well, let's leave the status quo. So every other time you critique a particular issue, they're saying you're over-politicking. Politics is about this, about the fact that, well, if you're trying to discuss the war in Congo, you know, NRA should take a position, NUP should take a position. I've not heard what their position is. DP should take a position. Of course, they'll take Mao's position. FDC should take a position. UPC would and should take a position. I take a very clear position on behalf of UPC. That my my position is actually authoritative as far as UPC is concerned, and the debate goes down there. So if you want to go ahead and have a conversation about Buganda, was it about Buganda, that kind of should not be able to be done. What about the question of infrastructure? There's a political contestation. Now, political leaders' jobs is to come up with alternative or competing ideas and values. Have a conversation in a media like this yourself, so that our fellow citizenry watch and determine and resolve which one is most persuasive. And in cases where public opinion matters, and particularly if it's a matter of perhaps going opinion polls, things like that, said no. Sarah's view on infrastructure is the most popular. The country knows, and either people vote for Sarah, or they compel some guys with impunity in State House to review their position and simply say that, look, public opinion is this, we are sorry we took this position, we lost your trillions, but now our view is that we've listened to you, the population. They rarely say we listen to Sarah, we listen to you, the population, and this is what we're going to do. That's what politics is all about. So it's more about talking rather than anything else. At the moment, I was in a Uber the other day where I was talking to a 27-year-old young man, and he said he dares not touch his politics because if you support NRA, you'll be in trouble with the opposition, and if you support the opposition, you'll be in trouble with the NRA. I think that's a very risky position to be in for somebody who's 27 years of age, 37 years of age, 47 years of age. You can imagine my age is actually the 57 plus age. So we need to be doing more politicking rather than less. And unfortunately, because institutions and systems have been broken, in Parliament we cannot have an open and free debate and have an open and free voices, including political politicians, from the governing party to run with a particular position on the basis of what they believe, in Parliament. Various elements of institutions, perhaps the judiciary, is very unlikely that in many cases, judges will take positions very clearly on the basis of the merit of the case. I hope they do, particularly because they should be the least compromised element of the three arms of government. And in many cases, rarely does the executive take a position within the national interest rather than one which entrenches either their position, their longevity in power, or perhaps who should replace them once they eventually retire.
Sarah Birete, isn't Mr. Joseph Othieno sounding too idealistic?
Oh, he's politicking on this show.
Interesting.
All right.
Yeah.
No, but on the question of whether we are engaged in too much politicking, I think first we need to define politics. What is politics? Politics is the management of society.
That's right.
So if you have issues like and the distribution of resources for the benefit of the people. So matters to do with budget, accountability, distribution of resources, and service delivery must be discussed all the time.
That's right.
I do not consider that politicking. Article 1 of the Constitution says power belongs to the people. Are we doing demand-driven service delivery according to the voice of the people? And is this demand-driven service delivery sufficient according to the wishes and aspirations of the people? I do not think so. And until we achieve that, we must discuss. We need actually increased spaces in regards to allocation of resources in this country, in regards to how use or misuse of resources and service delivery.
Well, it's interesting that the discussion about politics itself is political. No doubt about that. We can't. Then politicking itself is the engaging in politics.
Yes, and that's the management
and that is
of
the
society.
management of society. However, within the context of Uganda and where we find ourselves, perhaps the question is, are politicians resigning to the fact that not many of them, especially on the other side of the aisle, the opposition, or that are not in government, might not necessarily be in opposition, are unable to do the kind of politicking that they ought to do, and so they've resorted to playing the safe card, which at the end of the day means they're unable to do their job or be as proficient as they ought to be.
That is actually political treason, in other words, what they're trying to do. I think what Sarah and I are saying, and that's why we're trying to invoke the young people of this country. We want more people, on the basis of the definitions given, more people, particularly more young people, to get engaged in whatever is happening in society today, particularly because whatever we're doing today is going to determine what happens in the next 10, 20, 30, and in many cases, young people's time, possibly the next 50 years. And they need to be able to know that. I think there is a blackmail, political blackmail going on, where they say, you don't criticize criticize because you need to be able to be careful about your life. You don't criticize because there's no guarantee that you'll have that job tomorrow. You don't criticize because you'll be categorized. No. Politics is about a conversation, as actually Sarah says. No. If there are people in opposition and they don't want to take a particular position, those are not politicians, those are people who are abusing those spaces, and they need to be called out. If there are people in government, in this regime, particularly this very privileged 40-year-old regime, you know, in that position, you've already made a huge amount of money. And by the way, strangely enough, I was the other day in a public function somewhere in the East where there are people in government and others. And then you talk to many of these guys, including ministers, and they tell you, of course, no, we know it's wrong. But what in heaven, you know it's wrong, and you continue to do it. We need to be able to examine what everybody calls our conscience. We need to call on people in politics, both opposition and government. And indeed, people in civil society, the kind of stuff that Sarah's are doing, and people in the media like yourself, very critical, you know, to simply say that, look, you know, we need possibly to teach, because part of the problem that has happened is that when NRA came to power, they banned political parties, but they banned political competition, and then they pushed for this monolithic thing. So the fight now for the renewal of the political space where there's competition of ideas, I can see some of my friends, I've got very fantastic guys in NRA. You realize very openly that they're not comfortable having a discussion about, is it Loboa Hospital, what is the alternative kind of stuff. Oh, I don't want to be heard. No, those people are committing political treason, and they're committing treason, forgetting that any child of a billionaire in Uganda today, whether you like it or not, any child of a billionaire in Uganda today, unless we resolve this Uganda in a manner in which UPC suggests, you know, peacefully and through national dialogue and having a situation in which we forgive and we give and take and things like that, and we plan together for the future, you know, things will catch up with you in 10 years' time, in 20 years' time. Even if you remain part of this regime, you know, it's not sustainable. So I think these are the waking up thing that we need to do, and that's why we normally beg Mr. Museveni, who's the holder of the big key, that he needs to be able to wake up one time and simply say that, well, I'm now a man of wisdom. What do we do? You know, what will my legacy be? And what is my net contribution for my great-grandchildren? You know, they forget that's about their children and treats and whatever. No, but they've got grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and there'll be great-great-grandchildren who follow their blood, and whether you like it or not, in 50 years' time, it will catch up with you. And me, who does Jesus, I know it's absolutely the case that these are permanent realities.
Wow. He does Jesus, no doubt. Yes. Sarah Birete, you interact very intimately with politicians at all levels. Kiza Besigye, you've spoken to him. Yes. You've spoken to Amama Mbabazi, despite the fact that is now on the law. I'm sure you do speak to Norbert Mao on coffee, and these politicians and several ministers, these must be sharing or talking about what they think more, like a little more intimately than we hear them say on TV and on radio. What is the direction of thought when you interact with them? Do not put yourself on the spot.
No. 80% of the leaders in this country know that the country is going in the wrong direction. The problem is that they do not have courage.
They've chosen to
rectify the wrongs being done in this country. And this includes leaders in NRM.
Yeah.
Okay.
Some of them have resigned to being merchants in politics and enriching themselves at the expense of the majority suffering Ugandans. Recently, there was a headline that President Museveni was shocked by poverty in Busoga.
Yes, I saw that.
And then you wonder, where has he been living?
I was shocked
in
by
space.
That. You were shocked,
I was shocked by the fact that the president was
shocked by the poverty he has presided over.
Not in that particular steed, but the
personally,
fact that he doesn't know that these things are happening.
Yeah.
How can that be?
you know,
all right, please continue. I know.
No, that is the ingenuity. That is actually the dishonesty we are talking about. Okay. The guy knows, but he had to speak it. But it's possibly he didn't. It has been being misadvised. But no, he generally knows what the
was. He was in Busoga campaigning.
Precisely.
Just 1 year ago, he was in Busoga campaigning. Didn't he see the poverty?
Yeah. So quite clearly,
when you have a society that is consistently infected with jiggers, you know that they cannot afford proper sanitation, including housing, including means to keep their health. including means to deal with the proper diet, and that is a sign of poverty. You don't even need to do research.
What is the possibility that the president was dismayed at the fact that despite the initiatives that government has rolled out,
the failed initiatives,
to the Busoga people, they are unable to get themselves out of it?
Yeah, but where have these initiatives worked? The Uganda Bureau of Standards, Statistics, always publishes these facts. The East and in the North and the East, poverty is increasing. Doesn't he read reports from government agencies? They are detailed to the extent of the poverty.
He knows.
Doesn't he read these reports that we read by government agencies? So if you have a president shocked in courts by the extent of poverty in a region, then what country is he reading? Is he reading an imaginary country? Is he detached from reality in this country? And is he able to then provide solutions to the challenges of the people? These are the questions that Ugandans must ask.
Indeed. And I was encouraging somebody in his regime the other day, 40+ somebody, that look, you guys in the best place situation, to basically talk nicely to this old man and tell him, you've done your bit, you've had a bit of a long time, you know, I think ideas dry, you know, let somebody else try, and let's guarantee a situation in which you're not going to go anywhere, you know, nobody intends to take you over Lake Victoria to other spaces. No, let's try and find a situation in which there is a national conference, ideally, a national dialogue, open up, tell Mao to make sure that the next elections, you know, takes place.
I was just going to ask you that question, and I'm glad you brought it up. Mao took on an initiative, and he was criticized for going into bed with the National Resistance Movement.
Initiative?
The initiative to ensure a peaceful transition of power. He's been very vocal about it.
Mr. Museveni responded and said it was not Mao's initiative. No, Mao had to justify his going to the NRA thing, and which is fair enough. It's a political way of saying that, well, I'm going for this very particular. So it was a justification from his point of view and nothing else. And of course, it was first part. Quick point really is this, that people of age, particularly people in their 30s, upward, 30, 40s, whatever, they need to stop going onto the sail and waiting for some funny Jesus to come and resolve. No, miracles don't happen in a vacuum. You know, we'll have to make sure that we create an enabling environment in which a miracle of a post-Museveni and a post-Museveni stability happens in this country. And that is going to require courage and leadership from all of us.
All right, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. This discussion can go on for hours and days. I do hope it has emboldened those that ought to make the right decisions in terms of ensuring, first and foremost, that Uganda is at peace with